Hi everyone, I'm Aria, and this week we're creating this abstract sci-fi simulation. If you want to download the blend file from my original animation, make sure to head over to my Patreon page, become a member, and you'll get access to many of the blend files that you see on the channel. Also, make sure to like and subscribe. Okay, let's get started. First, hit A to select everything in the scene and hit delete. First, we want to create our cave, and there's much better ways of doing this, but this will just make it quick and easy. So Shift A, Mesh, and we'll click Cylinder. Then we want to rotate this on the Y, so R to rotate, Y, and then type in 90. Next, let's scale this up, so hit S to scale, Y, and type in 2. Then S, X, and type in 2.5. Now we just want to make some changes to the mesh, so hit Tab to go into Edit mode, or click up here. Now we want to add some loop cuts, so hold Control, hit R, click, and then hit Escape to leave it in place. Head down to the left and open up this little menu, then we can set this to about 12. Orbit around to the back, and we also want to add some geometry to this space here, so make sure that you're in either vertex or edge select. Hold Alt and then just click this edge to select everything. And then just drag your mouse inward to inset these faces, and we'll just do that a few times. Then we'll just head around to the front, and we want to get rid of this face, so hit 3 on your keyboard, or you can click here to go into face select. Click on this face and hit delete and select faces. Now we can hit Tab to go back into object mode, right click and shade smooth. Then to get sort of that cave look, we're going to just add a displace, so head over to the modifiers. Click, and we're going to add a displace. Click new, and then we'll click this little icon here to go into the texture, or you can click down here as well. Select this, and then we'll change this to clouds and set the size to 0.15. Next, we can just click back onto the modifiers tab. Click here to add one more modifier and select subdivision surface. Then let's set this to 2. I'm just going to scale this a bit, so S and Y, then just bring this in just slightly. It looks pretty good in these areas, but it's kind of a bit weird at the back, so like I said, this isn't the best method for doing this, but it is a simple way. So what you can do is just now head back into Edit mode by hitting Tab, then click here to go into Vertex Selection mode. Make sure that you set Proportional Editing on. Then you just need to select some of these vertices, and we can just move these around a bit just so that things are looking a little bit better. Until you've got something like that. I also just want to fix some of these in the front, so I'm not going to grab the very front one, but a couple loops in and just bring some of this up. Great, so something like that should work just fine. Tweak it until it looks right to you. Then now that we've got that, we can start adding our first set of particles. So let's go over to the right and click the particle tab. Head up and let's click this little plus symbol to add a new particle system. Then instead of using this as an emitter, we're just going to click hair. Then there's only a few things we need to change. So first let's change the number to 5,000. Instead of path, we are going to select collection. And collection is pretty much the same as object, except that you can have more than one. So let's create those. And the way I created my rocks was using an add-on. And the way to get this is to head up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons. Make sure that you've got all. Then type in the word extra. Then the one you want to select is Add Mesh Extra Objects. Make sure that's selected on. Then when you go to Mesh, you see that you have all of these extra options down here. So click Rock Generator. You can feel free to spend your time tweaking these settings, but I'm just going to set the number to 3. I'm also going to turn off Use Random Seed, and then you can just select the specific seed that you want. I'm just going to pick a random seed and just leave it at that. Then you can just separate these and bring them down, just so that they're not interfering with our scene. And you'll notice that 2 of these rocks for some reason came out almost exactly the same, so if you need to change them, you can just hit Tab to go into Edit mode. Make sure that you turn Proportional Editing off. Then you can just move these around just a little bit just so that you've got something different. Then once you've got all your rocks, just click and drag to select everything. Right click and select Move to Collection, or you can just hit M on your keyboard. Select New Collection, and I'm just going to name this Rocks, and then click OK. Our menu disappears, but you'll notice that all it does is just creates a new collection up here and adds each of your meshes into that. So you could do this on your own. If you just added a new collection, you could just drag and drop these into it, which would work the same. Now that we've got that, let's select our mesh one more time. Click our instance collection and we'll select rocks. They are quite large, so let's just change the size and variation. Scale to 0.025 and scale random to 1. I'm going to rename this to Cave. You can head back up to the top and there also is this seed option, and just click this until you find something that looks good to you. We are going to be adding a force later, so let's just keep these separate from our other forces. In the particle settings, head all the way down to the bottom. Then for effector collection, let's just select collection, which is just our base collection. Make sure you're saving as we go along as well. Next, let's add in our plasma ball. Shift A, mesh, and we'll click cube. Then let's just scale this, so S, and type in 0.3. Then we just want to add some subdivisions, so just hold Control and then hit 3 on your keyboard just to add these subdivisions. Keep in mind that if we go into edit mode, there's still only 4 vertices, so if we do want to displace this, we will need to apply these subdivisions. So head over to the modifiers, click on this arrow and click apply. Now if we hit tab, you'll see that all of the subdivisions are applied now. Right click, shade smooth. Then next we can add our displace. So back in the modifiers properties, we'll click here, click displace, new, and then we'll click this icon, clouds, set the size to 0.1 again, and then set the depth to 5. Back into the modifiers, and we're just going to set the strength to something a little bit lower. Click on our menu one more time, and we're going to add a subdivision surface, and set this to 2. Next, we want to make our displacement change over time so that we get some variation. Back in the modifiers under displace, instead of having this to local, we'll set this to object. Then of course we need an object, so Shift A, empty, and let's add a plane axis. I'm just going to move this over, so GY. Then just down here, click here so we can head back to frame 1. Then N on your keyboard, and we just want to set our rotation to something really small. This will have quite a bit of an effect on this, so you don't want to overdo this. Right click and insert keyframes. Click here to head to the last frame in our animation. And now you just want to set these to certain numbers. I'm just going to use roughly what I used for mine. Finally, make sure to set a keyframe, so right click and insert a keyframe, or just hit I. If I click back on our plasma and head back over to the modifiers properties, we'll click here. Then select the empty that we just created. I like to rename this stuff just so that it's easier to keep track of. So I'm just going to name this Plasma Control. I'm also going to name the cube Plasma just so that we know what we're controlling. Then back to frame 1 and hit play, and you can see that we've got some nice movement now. I also added a bit of rotation directly to this object, so let's do that as well. But before we do that, you can see if I hit play, it kind of starts slow and speeds up. So let's just click on our empty, bring your mouse down to the timeline, hit T, and select linear. If I quickly go into the graph editor, you can see now that the empty is set to linear. Then just click on the plasma itself. Make sure again you're on frame 1. Right click and insert a keyframe for the rotation. Head to frame 250. And then you can just set these all to somewhere around 250 or so, it doesn't really matter. Right click and insert a keyframe. Then one more time, hover over the timeline, T, and click linear. Since there's particles going into this object, I did scale it a little bit over time. So one more time back to frame 1, right click and insert a keyframe. Then on frame 250, just select all these and type in 0.35. Then add a keyframe. Play one more time, you can see that we've got really nice movement with our plasma ball. Now we're going to add our particle system that you see floating around our plasma ball. Again, there's many ways to do this, but the way I did this was just add an icosphere, so Shift A, Mesh, and Icosphere. Then we just want to scale this up around the size of our scene, so make sure to hit N to open up your transform settings here. Set the X-axis to 6, Y to 3.5, and Z to 3. If you just want to see through, make sure to head up here and click the X-ray toggle. Head over to the particles here, and we'll just click this plus to add a new particle system. Then set the number to 5000. And because we are using a harmonic force, I just found that starting our particle system a little bit early works best. So set this to -50, which will just cause our particle system to start before our simulation even runs. If I scroll out, you can see this is all that's been calculated prior to frame 1. Then for our end frame, you just want to set this to the length of the animation, so 250 in this case, and the lifetime to 150. Open up the source here, and we're going to change this to volume, and instead of jittered, we'll set this to random. Obviously, we don't want any of our particles falling, so quickly let's just scroll all the way to the bottom, and set our gravity to 0 under the field weight settings. Then let's scroll back up to where we were, turn off our velocity, click here to add some rotation, and we can open this up. Then just pick some type of random value. This doesn't matter too much. This will just help our particles glint with our lights. If you want to turn on dynamic, this will just interact with any collisions in the scene. Scroll down and let's just add a little bit of motion. So we're going to add a value of 10 for our Brownian motion. But if I hit play, you'll see that it quickly starts dispersing. So then we just want to add some damping, so 0.6. Play, and you can see now that it's a little bit more jittery. Scroll down just a little bit further. Click here, and we're going to have object instead of halo. Set the scale to 0.02 and 0.5, and unselect show emitter. Next, we need to select an object, so let's create one by hitting Shift A, Mesh, and click Icosphere, G and Z just to move this down. We can also move all of these down just so that they're out of the way. And let's add a subdivision of 1. That's it. So now we can click on our emitter, back into the particles, head all the way back down to where we were, and we're going to select our instance object. You'll notice that we've got 2 different icospheres here, so if you get confused, what you can do is just click this eyedropper. Then if we hover over top, you can see that it's icosphere.001, and just select it. So now that we know, let's just rename these to emitter and particle. And now we don't need to see our emitter anymore, so one more time, just head back into the particle settings. We want to go to the viewport and unselect show emitter. Then now if we click away, you can see that we've just got our particles. So next we want to add our force, so Shift A, force field, and we're going to click harmonic. Head over to the physics tab, set the strength to -5, and as well set the rest length to 2. Save, and then if we hit play, you can see that we've got a double effect here where we've got particles going into our object and flying outward. So now that we've got that done, we want to bake our particles, so just select any one of these particles, or you can just select the emitter, back into the particles, scroll down until you see cache, and then click bake. This should only take a few seconds to bake. Awesome, so now that we've got that done, we can start adding our lighting and shading. So head up to the shading tab, then just recenter your frame, head up to the right, and we're going to turn on our render preview. Of course, we're just going to have basically a gray reflection, just because if we go into the world tab here, you can see that we've just got a gray background. So we are going to use this color, but we're going to turn the strength down a little bit by typing in 0.1. For this scene, the only light that we have is basically the emission from our plasma ball, so let's start there. Make sure to select the plasma ball, click New. Then we can just start creating our texture, so Shift A, search for emission, and we want to mix these two together, so Shift A again and type in Mix. Make sure to select Mix Shader, add this in, then we can connect this to the bottom. Click the color, and we're just going to set this to an orangey red color. Then let's type in 250 for the strength. You'll see that everything just went white, and that's because we're using EEVEE and we need to add some extra things, so head over to the render settings, Then just some standard things, we're going to add ambient occlusion, and we also want to add bloom. Then as soon as we click screen space reflections, you'll see that we start to get a nicer effect. Make sure to open this up, and we're also going to add refraction, which will come into effect later. And the final thing that we're going to do is open up the film settings and uncheck transparent. I know that that's a little bit overpowering, but we're going to fix that. So Shift A, search for Voronoi texture, grab the distance output and hook it into the factor. Next, let's click here and select distance to edge and set the scale to 1. So just a couple more nodes for this. I'm going to select the Voronoi texture, hold Control and hit T to add the texture coordinate and mapping node. If you're unfamiliar of how to do that, just make sure to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and type in Node. Then just make sure that this is turned on. You could also just search for them in the search as well. Then instead of having generated, we're going to select Object and hook it into the vector. Shift A, search and type in Color Ramp. Drop this right in between the Voronoi and the Mix shader. Select this handle, click here, and we're just going to add a deep red. Something like that should work great. That's looking good for now. Then if you want under the render settings, we can just add a little bit more bloom, 0.065. Like I said, feel free to do this to your taste, but these are the settings that I used. Finally, we can come to our principled shader, take the roughness all the way down, and bring the transmission all the way up. Then hit N on your keyboard, or you can just go into the material properties and select screen space refraction. Also, what we can do is just click on the base color here, click on the value, and instead of having 1, we can set this to 2. Next thing we want to do is select K, so I'm just going to click here in the collections, click New, set the metallic to 0.5, and bring the roughness down to 0. Search for bump, hook this up to the normal, and set the strength to 0.1. Select the bump and Shift D to add a duplicate. Then make sure to hook this up into the normal. Shift A and search for Voronoi. Click here to change this to F2 and Manhattan. Then select this distance and make sure to put it into the height of the second bump map. Shift D to duplicate this Voronoi. Then we'll change this back to F1 as well as this option. Select this and let's hook it to the height. I'm going to turn off the overlays just so that you can see a bit better what this is doing. Set the scale to 25 for the top Voronoi, and for the bottom one we're going to set it to 650, just to get a really small texture. Then we want to add one more texture, so Shift A and type in noise, and hook the factor into the vector. Change the scale to 2, detail to 5, and distortion to 4. Then the very final thing I did just to change the roughness a little bit was just Shift A and add in a color ramp. Hook the color into the roughness and just bring this over. I'm just going to turn my overlays back on and select one of my rocks. Click New. Bring the metallic all the way up and the roughness almost all the way down. I'm just going to rename this material rock just so I know where to find it. Select my other 2 rocks and just click here to add that material to them. Just like that. The final texture that we need to do is our particle. So again, over in our collections, select particle, add a new material, then we're going to bring the roughness all the way down, clear coat all the way up, bring the transmission all the way up, then click the base color, and again, let's change the value from 1 to 2. Then the very final thing you need to do for glass materials is add screen space refraction. So again, in the shader editor, you can go to options, or you can just click here on the materials tab. Head all the way down and select screen space refractions. And now that we've got all of our materials and lighting, we can head back to the layout tab, turn on our render preview, then let's just set our camera in front of our cave, Shift A and let's click camera, then hold Control Alt and hit 0 to lock the camera to the viewport. Then I'm just going to make a few changes here. You can use the transform, or if you hit F3 and type in walk, you can use your arrow keys and your mouse to set your view as well. So now that we've got that set up, I'm just going to turn off the overlays, head over to the camera properties on the right, and turn on depth of field. Then let's open this up and select a focus object, which in this case can just be our plasma ball, and set the f-stop to 0.3. Make sure you're on frame 1 and we'll just set our first frame. Head over to the world properties and we can just bring the value down a little bit more. Make sure the camera is selected, hit I, and keyframe the location and rotation. Then last frame in our animation. Hit F3 to go into our walk navigation, then just use your up arrow to bring this in a lot closer. If you want to move up and down, you can use the E and Q keys as well. One more time, I'm going to hit I and set a keyframe. Now if I head back to frame 1, you can see that we've got our final animation. Awesome, so just pick any frame that you like. Head over to the rendering tab. If you do add motion blur with EEVEE, just make sure to add some extra steps or else it'll look kind of funny. Then I'm just going to add a little bit more resolution just so that it shows up better. Save and render image. And there's our final image, so I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Like and subscribe if you did. And if you're able to help support me in growing this channel, make sure to head over to my Patreon page and sign up to become a member. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye!